How many of you know at least one person that has been to prison or is currently in one? Probably a vast majority of you. Could this be due to our government's irresponsible spending on private prisons? After this speech, I hope to have informed you of how our government's irresponsible spending on private prisons leads to negative effects on Americans. As private prisons profit off of prisoners and incarceration rates increase, knowledge of our government's spending on private prisons becomes more and more necessary. Not only have I just researched this topic online, but I have also thoroughly read and discussed books about American prison systems. Today, I will inform you of the history of private prison systems, the problems they cause, and how to reform private prisons. According to the reporter Liberty Vertet from Fox News, the privatization of prisons in America can be traced back to before the Civil War. And more recently, in the 1980s, the private prison industry began booming, fueled by the war on drugs. According to author of Just Mercy, Bryan Stevenson, the prison population has increased from 300,000 people in the early 1970s to 2.3 million people today. According to author, Bryan Stevenson states that spending on jails and prisons by state and federal government has risen from $6.9 billion in 1980 to nearly $80 billion today. So not only has the incarcerated population nearly tripled, but also the government's spending on incarceration has more than tripled. Does this not raise an alarm? Furthermore, Stevenson explains that this increased spending has caused state and local governments to create new crimes, impose harsher sentences, and keep more people locked up so that they can earn more profits. Why are people profiting off of others' disadvantages? Lastly, the largest private prison company is the Corp of America, which had profits in 1993 of $4 million on $100 million in revenues, says Stephen Donziger from the Washington Post. With all this being said, this means that prisons are benefiting off of their prisoners, and in order to make profits, these prisons must always have prisoners. This leads to increased incarceration and harsher sentences. When reading the 20 Privatization of Prisons Pros and Cons, written by Louise Scale and published by Ventana, it was noted that the primary disadvantage of prison privatization is that people become commodities. Prisons don't make money unless they have a prison population to maintain. This goes to show that prisons must increase incarceration through harsher sentencing in order to make profits. People are profiting off of other people's misery. To make matters worse, these private prisons often target minorities. According to author of Just Mercy, Bryan Stevenson, 1 in every 3 black male babies born in this century is expected to be incarcerated. Finally, Bryan Stevenson mentions that we've created laws that make writing a bad check or committing a petty theft or minor property crime an offense that can result in life in prison. By stating this, Stevenson creates urgency for a change in American prison systems, because what world do we live in which petty thefts result in life imprisonment? As Bryan Stevenson said, it is our job to beat the drum for justice. In order to prevent the spread of private prisons and make an effort to abolish them, you must stay away from those who support them and promote those who hope to end them. In an article about the facts of America's private prison system, Liberty Vertet explains how you might also be investing in private prison systems without even knowing it. As of 2016, Wells Fargo, Bank of America, JP Morgan Chase, BNP, and U.S. Bancorp have all played a role in bankrolling private prison companies. This means that popular companies that you may be invested in support private prisons. So if you are anti-private prisons, you must take action and avoid these companies. It's also stated in this article that when President Trump was elected, the stock prices of private prison companies, CoreCivic and GEO, soared. This means that under Trump's presidency, these private prisons prospered. This goes to show the importance of electing officials who are anti-private prison. For example, Joe Biden, who made the executive order on January 26, 2021, stating that in order to decrease incarceration levels, we must reduce profit-based incentives to incarcerate by phasing out the federal government's reliance on privately operated criminal detention facilities. Now, to conclude, based on the facts I have presented, I have informed you of our government's irresponsible spending on private prisons and how that negatively affects Americans. It is important to remember the history of private prison systems and the problems they cause, so that you can understand and work to prevent these systems from spreading. Remember to do as Brian Stevenson said, beat the drum for justice, so that prison systems can no longer profit off of minorities. Thank you.